Well, Nigeria has not been able to use enough of its gas for power generation despite its 202 trillion standard cubic feet of gas reserves. Now, the power sector faces many challenges, including low investment, inadequate funding of projects, and huge indebtedness to gas suppliers. The Federal Ministry of Power, Works and Housing revealed that Nigeria's power grid dropped by 1,507.3 megawatts. The reason is largely due to unavailability of gas, constraining a total of 1,320 megawatts from being made available on the grid. Now, the power grid collapsed more than 4 times from January to May 2019, while it collapsed 12 times last year. This development has a big effect on the economy, as micro, small, and medium enterprises who contribute to the GDP rely solely on electricity for their businesses to grow. To put this into make more sense of this, I have an energy analyst joining me now from our Abuja studios, Michael Oluwagbemi. Glad to have you join us at this time, Mr. Oluwagbemi.
It's a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Well, I want to start this way. Let's look at what we have, this collapse in grid that we've been contending with for some time now. Even in the month of March, we've had 2 of it. Now, what would you say, in your thoughts, is responsible for this?
Well, it's a combination of a myriad of issues. I think 3 of them rises to the top. The first and foremost is the fact that the grid is aged. It's unreliable, and as such susceptible to a lot of seasonal factors, including weather and the demand that spikes at a particular time of the year. At about the same time when the weather situation becomes worse, when you talk about the wind and the rainfall coming in around the period of May, June, July, you typically experience this kind of massive downturn in power transmitted historically for the past 5 to 6 years if you look at the data. So that actually reflects the age of the grid. The grid fundamentally, as it is designed today, is aged and has not experienced a lot of investments. And it's probably not optimally designed for the economy that we run today. It was designed for an economy of the 1970s or so. So we need to take a look at the grid design first and foremost. The second thing is that lack of investment also reflects a lack of overall investment in the sector, which is driven primarily because of the issue of collection that you do not get from the discos and the poor business model that we're executing overall in the power sector. Nigeria decided to go the Indian model when it's privatized, but did not take into cognizance the peculiar Nigerian situation. It doesn't make sense that the transmission company of Nigeria that is charged with transmitting power from the power providers, the GENCOs, cannot collect its own money. It has to depend on the discos or the mercy of the discos to give it what they want to give it. And the people that actually produce power do not see how the money comes back to them. This is the reason why fundamentally, if you've looked at since the privatization, you've not really had any major injection of investment into the sector, despite the best hope of Nigeria when the sector was privatized. Even further to that is that we've also, and last but not the least, is the issue of regulation. I will have to say that it appears to me that the NERC, the regulator, has been asleep on the wheels. They need to come forcefully out to enforce the agreements that the discos have with the people of Nigeria. And moreover, the BP, which is the other regulator here, the owner of the 40% stake in each of these discos, in most of the discos actually, there's one disco that is probably 100% owned by the BP, but the other ones, the BP has at least 40%. It should enforce its shareholder rights and also leverage the fact that the Central Bank of Nigeria has loaned these discos quite a huge amount of money that it can collect, and we should go back to the drawing board and ask these discos to do and perform according to the contract that they were given. It's best practice in the world. We've seen a case of even in Nigeria more recently when the like of Intel's contract was revoked by the NPA. There's no reason why the people of Nigeria should continue to suffer for the lack of the capacity of these discos to invest in their distribution network or the ability to collect money so that it can go back to TCN of Nigeria in order to invest in the grid to ensure that we do not have these power failures, this massive downturn in our power capacity every now and then every year after a few weather conditions.
Okay, I want to follow up on this. we've been having issues recently surrounding the power grid in Nigeria. Now, there's this argument that there's an over-dependence on this grid, that we need to look at energy mix. Why are we not exploring that avenue, talking about energy mix at this time? We have enough of sun in this part of the world. We have coal. We can take advantage of all of this. Why do we depend solely on this grid?
No, the grid is a grid. It's not, has nothing to do with the energy mix. The energy mix, you're talking about the generation aspect now. When we talk about the grid, we're talking about the transmission aspect. So as far as the energy mix is concerned, we can diversify the energy mix and produce more from solar, definitely. We can do a lot more when it comes to our generation from small hydropower, which is also very important. We have large hydro projects that are also line fallow, wind, as well as offshore wind, especially in the Niger Delta, as well as in the far north, where you have good winds in the northeast of Nigeria, can enhance the energy mix. But again, you are still putting investment, and we are still discussing the generation aspect. The transmission aspect is when we talk about the grid. And the solution there is either we decide to go towards the regional grid model or mini grid model, where we actually allow communities and large regional economic powerhouses to have their own grid and then interlink the grids. So ultimately, let us remember this. The grid model of actually putting cheap power from places where you can produce them cheaply into a network that can transmit power to areas where you might not be able to produce cheaply makes sense from a pure economics of scale perspective. Now, the second question, when you now decide that yes, it's good to have a grid, is how do you design the grid? The grid we have today was designed for a Nigeria where the two primary production centers were Abuja and Lagos. That is no longer the case. In Nigeria today, 50% of Nigerians live in about 13 cities. And also you have to take cognizance of the 36 state capitals. So when you look at it, you have to deal with any odds of almost 40 to 45 cities that you have to design the grid for. The current grid design is flawed. We need to move towards a regional grid model as supported by mini grids and interconnected by what we call the high voltage DC cables that will then interconnect these grids to form a uniform patchwork of regional grids. The sole single grid design that we currently carry over from the colonial era cannot serve the modern economy of Nigeria that requires anything of up to 70,000 megawatts. The boasting, what we say today is that we have capacity for grid capacity of up to 7,000 megawatts, which by the way is yet to be tested because this is all just willing capacity. Nobody has thought about the fact that we as a country actually require 70,000 megawatts to sustain this economy. Can the current grid design sustain that 70,000 megawatts? I doubt it. So we need to have a serious discussion which will be predicated on increased investment and also increased regulation on the discos, because unless we're able to collect money, unless we 100% meter all Nigerian consumers of power and ensure people pay for what they use, therefore investors will invest and it will free up money for building a new grid. Various countries around the world are now interconnecting their grid, not just with their neighbors, but even with their regional partners. Nigeria, I know, is exploring interconnecting our grid with Cameroon as well as Niger and Benin Republic. But this can only be effective and make more sense when we actually ensure that the grid within our country is effectively and optimally designed to meet the challenges of the Nigerian economy in the 21st century. So yes, we need to move towards a better grid design, but the energy mix only supports that, and if we continue to invest just on the energy mix, we'll continue to generate 8,000, 6,000, even 12, 20,000 megawatts of stranded power that does not get to the people. We've increased production in the last few years, but yet we are still where we started, almost 1,500 megawatts on May 29, 2015, simply because we have not redesigned the grid. Redesigning the grid and ensuring that we redesign the business model around the grid, allowing perhaps TCN to offtake power from Genco and be the one to sell to discos and ensure the discos sell or return the money back to TCN might be a model we want to look at. This is the South African model that is implemented via the South African state company in South Africa. We should look at that model rather than what we are doing today, while also making sure we build more mini grids and ensure the regional grids are interconnected by DC cables. Now,
Mr. Luke, let's look at the privatization process. You've actually touched on that, yes, of course, but let's dig down. We know the generation aspect and the distribution has been privatized. Transmission is still under the control of government. Now, the argument of the discos now, talking about the distribution companies, is that they need a cost-reflective tariff. And they've been on this process has been on for like, I think 5 years now, and we are still where we are. What do you think about the actions? Are the discos being investors, have they done enough on their part, at least to meet the part of their own obligation? It's an agreement. Government has not fulfilled 100%. But what about them? What's your assessment of how far the discos have done in implementing their part of this privatization agreement?
Basically put, the discos have definitely not performed their part of the contract. First and foremost. But secondly is that the regulator also have allowed them to get away with murder, so to say. The discos, let's be clear, do not have exclusive contracts to supply the area where they are assigned today. They don't have exclusivity. So Ibadan Disco is called Ibadan Disco because it has wires and cable from Legacy, NEPA, and PHCN. It does not mean it's the only one that can supply Ibadan as far as the law is concerned. There's nothing in their contract, and I think the Minister of Power, the extra Minister of Power and Works and Housing have made this clear. So why are the NERC, where these power companies are failing, these discos are failing, why have they not awarded new licenses to people who are capable, who have the financial wherewithal? So it is very clear to me here that not only are we experiencing the fact that the discos have not performed their part in terms of investing and strengthening the distribution network and ensuring 100% metering. Because the work of the discos are simple. They don't produce power. All they need to do is to take power from the transmission company of Nigeria to the last mile and ensure you all get it and you all can be able to pay for it and ensure that investment gets back into the power sector. What they've done basically is that they failed to meter. We failed to do 100% metering. Therefore, the money that is originating from the consumer is not able to get back into the power sector, while also at the same time complaining about tariff. If they were so concerned about tariff, why are they not 100% metering? If you are complaining that the amount you are charging today is low, but the amount that you are charging today, you're not even 100% collecting. You're only collecting 25 to 30%. So it makes sense. The argument is one that holds no water whatsoever. And let's not forget, the government is a 40% owner. I repeat this. BP is a 40% owner of every disco in Nigeria and 100% owner of actually the Yola disco. So the BP can exercise its shareholder rights. Most of these 60% owners are actually divided. They are not a single entity. So it makes no sense why a 40% major shareholder will be held hostage by 60% shareholder, has no say in the operation of the company. And this company continues to borrow from the Nigerian people through the central bank. And we don't even know whether we're going to get the money back. So I think the NERC needs to go in there and needs to enforce the contracts, while also at the same time putting them under pressure by awarding contracts for the 13 major cities in Nigeria to ensure these cities can get the power they need if the discos fail to meter for the power that is being produced currently. And then give the GENCO the right to sell directly to the new discos. And let's see whether the old discos are going to be in business.
Finally, before we go now, let's look at the human angle of it now, how this affects businesses. I know you have artisans around you and you see what they go through to be able to run their businesses. What effect would you say this is really having? And, you know, it has an impact on the economy too, talking about the GDP growth of the economy.
Absolutely, the effects is deleterious. I mean, we support, I'm executive partner at Loft Inc., and we support medium, small, and enterprises. And we hear these stories all the time. Companies that are operating at a cost average that is way higher than their competitors, even outside the country as well as within the country where they are lucky to actually have power. Companies that are not able to produce for hours just because the power is down, or for days or months in some instances. Even those who are able to buy or afford generator have to pay so much, and they cannot pass on this cost to consumers because of course of the general economic condition of the country. So small businesses are suffering. We have to remember that they are responsible for over 70% of jobs that are created in Nigeria today. So if we want small businesses to prosper, then we need to provide them cheap grid power. And if we're going to provide cheap grid power, then we need to ensure that everybody in the value chain, from the GENCO to the TCN to the discos, they do their work. And when they don't do their work, the regulator have to regulate. The work of the regulator also is to create new innovative ways to make sure, to ensure consumers actually get the power they need. This includes awarding licenses to IPPs, companies that want to supply the major cities, and also allowing them to build their own mini grid if necessary, and ensuring being able to actually come down hard on companies that are not performing their part by withdrawing licenses. These are things that the regulator can do, and I think that it's high time we get to it. We saw what was done in terms of the preferential treatment that was given to Lagos, but unfortunately was not executed in the last 4 years. We can do more of that, and we can ensure that we work with our state governors, work with private sector to ensure 100% metering for independent power companies, providers, that can be focused on the 13 cities that have the large population that can afford the power. While we'll then let the rural areas fall back on the cheap grid power that is coming from hydroelectric power, as well as the National Independent Power Program via NDPHC and the gas-fired power stations that we had built in the past. These are some of the things that can be done. We can approach this problem. These problems can be solved. The minds that created the problem can solve it, and this is a strong belief. But the small businesses are suffering, and it's time for us to give them relief.
Mr. Michael Oluwagbemi, thank you very much for sharing your time with us this afternoon, making real sense of this topic.